They wanted them erased, not killed, erased. And what the Ottomans invented to break these women was worse than any death you could imagine. The year is 1471. In the highlands of Epirus, where mountains claw at the sky, the convent of Saint Anastasia clings to a cliffside like a prayer barely whispered. Inside its cold stone corridors, 17 women move through their evening prayers. Their voices rise and fall in the ancient rhythms of the Latin liturgy, words they have spoken since childhood, words that have comforted them through plague, through war, through the slow collapse of the world they once knew. But tonight those words taste different. Through the narrow windows, the horizon burns crimson. Not sunset, never sunset. Those are the banners of an empire that does not merely conquer, it consumes. The Ottoman war machine rolls across the landscape like a force of nature, unstoppable, unrelenting, erasing centuries of faith with every mile it devours. Sister Catherine, the abbess for 9 years, grips an iron crucifix forged in Byzantine Constantinople. Her knuckles whiten. Her hands do not shake from fear, they shake from knowing, because she understands what approaches, what every nun in the sanctuary understands in the pit of their being. The empire at their gates does not want their surrender. It wants something far more total, something historians are only now beginning to fully comprehend. And what they are about to do to these women was designed to leave no trace, no memory, no story that could ever inspire resistance. If you have ever wondered why some stories vanish from history while others echo across centuries, you are about to discover the answer. Welcome to the Historian Fact. We do not simply recount events, we excavate the buried truths that others have forgotten. Through missionary archives, Ottoman state records, and testimonies hidden in Vatican vaults, we resurrect the voices that empires tried to silence. Every like, every subscription, every share helps us pull one more truth from the darkness. Now, let us return to that convent, because the bell has stopped ringing and the soldiers are at the gate. To understand what happened to these women, you must first understand the machine that consumed them. 18 years earlier, in 1453, Constantinople had fallen. The jewel of Christendom, the new Rome that had stood for over 11 centuries, collapsed in 53 days of cannon fire and blood. The Hagia Sophia, once the greatest cathedral in the known world, had its crosses torn down within hours of the conquest. Its golden mosaics were plastered over, its sacred bells melted for ammunition. Within a week, the Muslim call to prayer echoed from its domes where Christian hymns had risen for 900 years. Sultan Mehmed II stood in the nave of that ancient church and declared it a mosque, not because he required another place of worship, but because he understood something that most conquerors never grasp. You do not defeat a people by slaughtering them, you defeat them by annihilating who they were. The Ottomans did not merely seize territory, they seized identity. When Mehmed cast his gaze westward toward the scattered remnants of the Byzantine world, he saw wounds that refused to close. Every church bell that still tolled, every monastery that still stood, every cross that still cast its shadow upon conquered soil. These were not merely buildings. These were acts of defiance, living proof that the old world refused to die. And every nun who still prayed in Latin was a breathing reminder that faith could outlast armies. So the Sultan made a fateful decision. If they would not convert, they would vanish, not through massacre. Massacre creates martyrs. Martyrs inspire resistance. Ballads are composed. Stories are told. The dead become immortal. Number. The Ottomans had perfected something far more insidious. Something that left no ballads, no stories, no memory at all. A strategy of erasure. By 1471, this method had been tested across the empire. Greek monasteries in Morea, Serbian convents in the Balkans, Armenian churches in Anatolia. They did not burn them all. They converted some, abandoned others, but the pattern remained constant. First came the offer, then came the silence. The convent of Saint Anastasia, perched upon a mountainside in Epirus, far from any garrison or ally, was about to become another test case, another footnote in an empire's expansion. But these women did not know they were footnotes. These were not warriors. They were women who had spent their entire lives in silence and contemplation. Their weapons were rosaries. Their armor was devotion. Most had never seen a soldier, never held a blade, never imagined they would need to. Sister Catherine had served as abbess for 9 years. Before that, she had nursed the sick in a village that no longer existed, swallowed by plague in 1449. She had come to the convent not to flee the world, but to comprehend it. Sister Irene was only 21. She had taken her vows merely 18 months before. Her palms still bore the calluses from her father's olive groves. She had entered the convent after her entire family perished in a raid. The convent was the only place she had felt secure since that night. Sister Olympia was 73. She had outlived 2 abbesses, 1 emperor, and more wars than she could remember. She had stopped fearing death decades ago, but none of them had ever confronted this. If this moment in history does not move you to learn more, you may be missing the lesson our ancestors perished to teach us. That the most dangerous thing you can do in the face of absolute power is to refuse to forget who you are. Now, watch what happens when faith meets empire. The first cannon strike comes at dawn. It does not hit the chapel. It strikes the bell tower. The sound is apocalyptic. Stone erupts into the air. Iron screams against iron. The bell that has rung every morning for 160 years shatters mid-swing, and the fragments rain down upon the courtyard where the sisters cultivate herbs for healing. The same hands that tended those plants now cover their ears, trembling. Sister Catherine does not scream. She stands, crucifix raised high, and begins to chant, the Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. One by one, the others join her. 17 voices rising against the thunder of an empire. But empires do not listen to chants. By midday, the gates are shattered. Ottoman soldiers flood into the courtyard, not with blades drawn, but with ledgers, quills, ink pots. They move through the convent like clerks, not conquerors, counting, recording, cataloguing, because to the Ottomans, these women are not people. They are inventory. A translator steps forward. A Greek man who once resided in these hills. His voice trembles as he reads from a scroll, and you can hear the shame buried in every syllable. By order of Sultan Mehmed II, all subjects of the conquered territories must submit to the authority of the Sublime Porte. Those who convert will be granted protection. Those who refuse will face the consequences of rebellion. Sister Catherine steps forward. Her face is calm, almost serene. She speaks not to the soldiers but to the translator in Greek, so clear that everyone comprehends. Tell your Sultan that we have already given our lives to a king. We have nothing remaining to surrender. The officer in charge, a man named Hussein Pasha, whose name appears in Ottoman military records from the 1471 Thesprotian campaign, does not respond with anger. He responds with something far more terrifying, a smile, because he knows something the nuns do not yet understand. The Ottomans have refined the art of breaking people without killing them. That night, the women are imprisoned inside their own chapel. No food, no water. Only darkness and the sound of soldiers outside, laughing, eating, living, while they wait to see who breaks first. 2 sisters, younger ones from Ioannina, begin to weep in the corner. Their sobs echo off the stone walls. But Sister Irene, barely 21 years old, begins to whisper a psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Then another. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Then another, and slowly the weeping ceases. This is the moment the Ottomans underestimated them. These women had spent their entire lives preparing for suffering, fasting, vigils in the cold, hours of silence, submission to something greater than themselves. What the soldiers saw as torture, the nuns saw as their daily discipline. MC 13. But Hussein Pasha is patient. He has witnessed this before. In Morea, in Epirus, in the ruins of Serbian monasteries where monks believed their faith would save them. Faith is like a candle, he once wrote in a letter to the Sultan, still preserved in the Topkapi Palace archives. It burns brightest just before it extinguishes. He's about to test that theory. On the second day, the doors open. A servant enters with bread and water, real food, clean water. He sets it down without a word and departs. The nuns stare at it. Their throats are parched, their stomachs hollow. The younger sisters look to Catherine, desperation in their eyes. Sister Olympia, the eldest, speaks first. They want us to take it, to feel gratitude, to soften. Catherine nods. Then we fast. They do not touch the food. By the 3rd day, their lips are cracked and bleeding. Their hands tremble. The younger sisters can barely stand, but they do not break. Hussein Pasha watches from the courtyard, arms crossed. He is impressed, frustrated, and perhaps just for a moment something close to respect flickers across his face. But respect does not alter strategy. On the 4th day, the doors open again. This time, it is not a servant. It is Hussein himself. He speaks in Turkish, and the translator follows behind him like a shadow. You are not criminals, you are not enemies, you are simply mistaken. The Sultan is merciful. He offers you new lives, new names, protection. All you must do is speak the words, silence, or you can come with us to Constantinople. There the Sultan himself will hear your case. Perhaps he will be moved by your conviction. He pauses, lets the words settle. But the road is long, and the weak do not survive it. It is not a threat. It is a promise. Sister Catherine looks at her sisters. Some are barely conscious. Some are praying with their eyes closed. Some are staring at the floor, trying to find strength in the stone. She turns back to Hussein. We will walk. The smile returns to his face. Good. We depart at dawn. That night, the nuns hold each other in the darkness. No one speaks, but Sister Irene begins to hum softly, a hymn they sang at Vespers. One by one, the others join her. Outside, the soldiers hear it. Some of them pause. Some of them look away. One of them, years later, will tell his grandson about the women who sang themselves toward death. But that story will be forgotten too. For now, the hymn rises through the cracks in the chapel walls and drifts out into the night. A prayer, a plea, a declaration. We are still here. They depart at dawn on the 5th day. 17 women, hands bound with rope, walking south toward the coast. No carts, no horses, only their feet and the dust and the sun that shows no mercy. The soldiers do not rush them. They do not need to. The road itself is the punishment. By the 2nd day, Sister Agnes collapses. She is 58. Her knees have been failing for years. She tries to stand, but her legs will not support her. The soldiers do not wait. Sister Irene and another nun, Sister Helena, lift her between them and carry her for the next 3 miles. When they finally stop for the night, Agnes is unconscious. By morning, she is gone. They bury her by the roadside with their hands. No tools, no ceremony, only dirt and whispered prayers. The soldiers watch. They do not stop them. Hussein Pasha makes a note in his ledger, 16 remaining. On the 4th day, it happens again. Sister Euphemia, who has not spoken since the siege, simply stops walking. She sits down in the middle of the road, closes her eyes and does not rise. They leave her there. By the time they reach the port of Arta 7 days later, only 12 remain. But something happened on that road. Something the Ottomans did not anticipate. The nuns stopped weeping, stopped begging. They walked in silence. But it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of women who'd already made their choice. Sister Catherine had been walking at the front of the line, leading them even with her hands bound. But on the morning of the 7th day, Hussein Pasha summons her. She is brought to his tent alone. What happens next is not described in Ottoman records. It is described in a letter from a Venetian merchant who witnessed the aftermath, a letter discovered in 2007 in the archives of Dubrovnik. He writes, "I saw them bring her back at dawn. She could not walk. Her eyes, God forgive me, her eyes were open, but she was not inside them anymore. They dressed her in silk and paraded her through the camp as a convert. But when I passed close, I heard her lips moving. She was still praying in Latin silently. She had not broken. They had simply taken her body and left her soul to wander. This is the Ottoman strategy that history does not teach you. They did not want martyrs. Martyrs inspire resistance. Songs are written, stories are told, the dead become saints. They wanted ghosts, women who would walk, talk, eat, breathe, but would never be whole again. Living proof that rebellion was futile, living warnings to anyone who thought faith could stand against empire. Sister Catherine walked with them the rest of the way to the coast, but she never spoke again, never looked anyone in the eye. She was there, but she was not. The younger sisters wept when they saw her. The older ones just prayed harder. At the port of Arta, they are loaded onto a galley, a massive warship with rows of benches and chains bolted to the wood. This is not a passenger ship. This is a vessel designed for control. Slaves, prisoners, cargo. The nuns are chained to the benches, wrists locked to iron rings. A ship's manifest discovered in 1992 in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace Museum lists them not by name, but by number. Religious captives, female 12 destination, imperial household purpose, domestic service and conversion. That word service is doing considerable work. The voyage lasts 11 days. The sea is not kind. Storms lash the deck. Salt spray stings their cracked lips. The ship pitches and rolls, and the women who have never seen the ocean vomit until there is nothing left. At night, the youngest, Sister Irene, whispers psalms beneath her breath. Her voice is faint, barely audible over the crashing waves. But the other prisoners, Greeks, Serbs, Italians, men and women chained beside them, turn their heads to listen. For a moment, the sea seems to still. When the ship finally entered the Bosphorus, the sisters see the skyline of Constantinople rise before them. Domes, minarets, walls that seem to stretch forever. The city gleams in the dawn light like a blade. For centuries, it had been called the city of the world's desire. Now it would become their cage. From the docks, they marched through narrow streets lined with merchants, soldiers, and slaves. People stopped to stare. Christian nuns among the captives are a rarity, even in an empire built on conquest. This is unusual. They are led past the ancient walls, through the imperial district, past gardens where fountains sing and peacocks scream, and then in the shadow of Hagia Sophia, the great church that is now a mosque, they are forced to stop, to kneel. As the call to prayer echoes from the minarets, one of the sisters whispers, "We are home, but it is no longer ours." They are taken to the palace, but not to the grand halls, not to the courtyards where ambassadors walk and viziers conspire. They are taken beneath, down stone steps that spiral into darkness, through tunnels that smell of damp and decay, to a place that does not officially exist. If you are still watching, it is because part of you knows this story needs to be told. Subscribe to the Historian Fact, not for us, but for them, for the voices that were swallowed by silence. Now, let us follow them into the dark. Beneath Topkapi Palace, there is a network of tunnels that tourists never see. Storage rooms, servant quarters, forgotten corridors that wind through the bedrock-like veins. And in the farthest corner, sealed off for centuries, a room with no official purpose. In 2014, during restoration work, archaeologists broke through a false wall. What they found stopped them cold. Scratched into the stone, barely visible, were crosses. Dozens of them. Small, crude, carved with fingernails or shards of broken pottery. And beneath those crosses, etched in Latin, 4 words, Lux in tenebri lucet. The light shines in the darkness. This was their chapel. For months, perhaps years, these women lived beneath the palace, working as silent servants by day, scrubbing floors, washing linens, tending fires for rooms they would never enter. But at night, when the palace slept, they gathered in this forgotten room and prayed. They had no priest, no altar, no Bible, only memory. They recited psalms from recall, verses half forgotten, reshaped into prayers that kept them alive. They sang hymns in whispers so faint the stone barely caught them. They held communion with bread stolen from the kitchens and water from the palace wells. And they carved their faith into stone, one scratch at a time, knowing no one would ever see it. Sister Irene was among them, the girl who had whispered psalms on the ship, who had carried Sister Agnes on the road, who had refused to look away when they brought Sister Catherine back in silk. She became their voice in the dark. The archaeologists found her mark too, a small olive branch scratched into the corner of the wall. Beside it, 17 lines, one for each sister, but only 7 lines were complete. The rest trailed off into nothing. They used broken pottery for candle holders, a scrap of linen for an altar cloth. From a shard of a shattered mirror, they fashioned a crude cross. In the secret chapel, they gathered each night after the palace slept. No hymns, no sermons, only whispers. Each woman knelt and shared a memory. Her home, her church bell, the warmth of bread before dawn. These memories became their new psalms, small offerings to a God who still listened in the dark. A Venetian prisoner held in the palace for ransom in 1480 wrote of strange voices echoing beneath the harem, women singing in Latin to a God not of this empire. For centuries, historians dismissed it as superstition until they found the chapel. But here's what breaks your heart. The crosses stop. Halfway through the wall, the scratches become erratic, desperate. The lines deepen as if carved with more force, more urgency. Then nothing. Ottoman records from 1483 mention a cleansing of the palace staff under the new sultan. Anyone deemed unproductive or resistant was removed. No details, no names, no burial sites, Just one line in a ledger written in neat Ottoman script. Disposed. The nuns of Saint Anastasia vanished from history. 12 women who had walked 7 days to hell, who had crossed the sea in chains, who had carved prayers into stone in the dark, gone, but their chapel remained. A French diplomat in 1715 wrote about a rumor among the older palace servants that on certain nights, if you stood in the lower halls, the air would grow cold, and if you listened closely, you could hear women singing in Latin. He dismissed it as superstition, the foolish beliefs of uneducated servants. But the walls do not lie. In 2014, when the archaeologists examined the chapel more closely, they found something else. Traces of wax, not from Ottoman candles but from a different source, older, mixed with herbs, the kind of candles nuns made in convents. Which means they kept their vigil for longer than anyone thought possible. Months, perhaps years, carving crosses, whispering prayers, refusing to disappear. Sister Irene's olive branch was the last mark on the wall. Beside it, scratched so faintly it almost was not there, 2 words in Greek, "We endure." But the truth is, they did not just endure. They left something behind that empires could not erase. A room full of crosses, a prayer carved in stone, proof that faith could survive where walls and chains could not. The Ottoman Empire lasted until 1922, 6 centuries of conquest and power. But in the end, it was those scratches on the wall that survived. Not the Sultan's decrees, not Hossein Pasha's ledgers, not the silk they dressed Sister Catherine in. Just 4 Latin words carved by women the world forgot. Lux, in tenebris. Lucet, the light shines in the darkness. So why does this story matter? Because it is not about religion. It is not even about the Ottomans. It is about what power does when it tries to erase people and what happens when those people refuse to disappear. The Ottoman Empire lasted 600 years. They conquered 3 continents. They rewrote maps, languages, entire cultures. They turned the greatest cathedral in Christendom into a mosque. They ruled from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia. But they could not erase 12 women who scratched prayers into stone. Think about that. An empire with armies, cannons, endless resources, and the will to reshape the world against women with nothing but fingernails and faith. And the women won. Not in the way empires measure victory. They did not reclaim their convent. They did not convert their captors. They did not live to see freedom. But they left a mark. History is written by the victors. But memory is written by the survivors. And sometimes survival looks like a cross carved in the dark where no one was supposed to see it. A prayer whispered in a language the conquerors tried to silence. An olive branch scratched into stone to remember the sisters who fell. Centuries later, we found it anyway. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." These women lived forward into darkness. They walked 7 days knowing they might not survive. They crossed the sea in chains knowing what waited on the other side. They descended into tunnels beneath a palace knowing they might never see sunlight again. But they carved their prayers anyway, trusting that someone someday would look backward and find them. You just did. In 2014, when the archaeologists stood in that hidden chapel staring at those crosses, one of them asked a question that haunts me. How long did they keep the vigil? The wax traces suggest years. The depth of some carvings suggests desperate repeated effort, which means these women gathered night after night, year after year in absolute darkness, and refused to stop believing. Even when sisters disappeared, even when the scratches on the wall stopped growing, even when hope should have died, they kept carving. That is not just faith, that is defiance in its purest form. The Ottoman Empire is gone now, dissolved in 1922. Its sultans are dust. Its armies are memory. The palace still stands, but it is a museum now. Tourists walk its halls taking pictures, unaware of what lies beneath their feet, but those crosses remain. And that Latin phrase, barely visible after 5 centuries, still speaks. Lux in tenebris, lucid. The light shines in the darkness. It is from the Gospel of John. A verse about light that cannot be extinguished, about truth that survives even when everything else is taken away. Sister Irene carved those words knowing she would never leave that palace, knowing her name would be forgotten, knowing the world would move on without her. But she carved them anyway because she understood something that empires never do. You can conquer land. You can rewrite history. You can erase names from ledgers and bury bodies in unmarked graves, but you cannot kill what people carry inside them, and you cannot silence what they carve into stone. Empires fall. Stones remain. The light shines in the darkness. You have just witnessed one of history's most profound truths. If stories like this remind you how fragile humanity is, how easily voices can be erased, then like this video and subscribe to The Historian Fact, because some voices deserve to be heard, even if they were silenced centuries ago, especially then. The nuns of Saint Anastasia were meant to disappear. That was the plan. Erase them, break them, turn them into ghosts or converts or footnotes in Ottoman ledgers. But they did not disappear. They are still here in those crosses, in that Latin phrase, in the chapel that archaeologists found 500 years later. And now they are here with you because you listened, because you remembered, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Lux in tenebris, lucid. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.